Captain Rebecca Martinez pressed her gloved hand against the throttle of her F-16 Fighting Falcon, feeling the familiar vibration of the twin-engine aircraft cutting through the crisp morning air at 30,000 feet. The digital display showed her coordinates over the Nevada desert, exactly where her classified mission briefing had indicated she needed to be. What it hadn't mentioned was the pair of F-22 Raptors that had been shadowing her for the past 15 minutes. Through her helmet's heads-up display, she could see the sleek, angular silhouettes of the fifth-generation fighters maintaining a loose formation about 2 miles off her starboard wing. Their presence wasn't entirely unexpected. This was restricted airspace, after all. But something about their persistent shadowing made her jaw clench beneath her oxygen mask. She'd been flying combat missions for 8 years, including 2 tours in the Middle East, and she knew the difference between a routine intercept and something more deliberate. The radio crackled to life with the authoritative voice of the lead F-22 pilot. "Unknown aircraft, this is Lightning 1-1. You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and state your purpose." Rebecca's dark eyes narrowed as she glanced at her navigation display. Every coordinate, every waypoint, every classified detail of her flight path had been meticulously planned and approved at the highest levels. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, flying exactly the mission she'd been ordered to fly. The F-22 pilots should have been briefed about her presence, unless someone higher up the chain of command had decided to make her life more complicated than it needed to be. "Lightning 1-1, this is Falcon 7-7, she responded, her voice steady despite the irritation building in her chest. "I am on authorized flight operations. Please verify with your command." The response came back almost immediately, carrying a tone of barely concealed condescension. "Falcon 7-7, we have no record of authorized operations in this sector. You will alter course immediately and proceed to bearing 090 for escort to Nellis Air Force Base." Rebecca's grip tightened on the control stick. She'd encountered this type of situation before. Ambitious pilots, usually men, who seemed to think that their advanced aircraft gave them the authority to push around anyone they perceived as inferior. The F-22 was undoubtedly a superior fighter to her F-16. But superiority in equipment didn't automatically translate to superiority in mission authority or pilot skill. She keyed her radio again, this time allowing a slight edge to creep into her voice. "Lightning 1-1, I repeat, I am on authorized operations. I suggest you contact your commanding officer before making demands you might regret." The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial communication. When the F-22 pilot's voice returned, it carried an unmistakable note of amusement. "Falcon 7-7, I am Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson, and I am the commanding officer of this sector. You will comply with my instructions, or I will consider you a hostile contact." Rebecca felt her heart rate spike, not from fear, but from the pure audacity of the threat. She'd been flying these missions longer than she cared to remember, and she'd never encountered such blatant disregard for proper protocols. More importantly, she knew something that Lieutenant Colonel Peterson clearly didn't, something that was about to make this encounter very interesting for all parties involved. Colonel Anderson Thompson sat in the operations center at Nellis Air Force Base, watching the developing situation on his radar screen with growing concern. The radio chatter between the F-22s and the lone F-16 had been escalating for the past several minutes, and he could see the tactical display showing the three aircraft locked in what appeared to be a tense standoff over the Nevada desert. What troubled him most wasn't the intercept itself. That was standard protocol for unknown aircraft in restricted airspace. But the fact that he'd been specifically ordered to clear that exact corridor for a classified operation. His weathered fingers drummed against the metal desk as he studied the flight data on his computer screen. The F-16's call sign, Falcon 77, didn't appear in any of the standard databases, which meant it was either a clerical error or something far more sensitive than routine training operations. Given the specific instructions he'd received from Pentagon-level command just 2 hours earlier, he suspected the latter. "Sergeant Williams," he called to his communications specialist, "get me a direct line to the Pentagon. I need to speak with General Morrison immediately." The young sergeant's fingers flew across his keyboard, establishing the encrypted connection that would allow Thompson to speak directly with one of the most powerful figures in the Air Force hierarchy. While he waited, Thompson continued monitoring the radio traffic, noting the increasing tension in Lieutenant Colonel Peterson's voice as he repeated his demands for the F-16 to alter course. The secure phone buzzed, and General Morrison's familiar baritone filled the operations center. "Thompson, I assume you're calling about the situation developing over Sector 7. "Yes, sir. My F-22s have intercepted an unknown F-16 with call sign Falcon 77. The pilot claims to be on authorized operations, but we have no record of any scheduled flights in that corridor." Thompson paused, choosing his words carefully. "However, I received orders this morning to clear that exact airspace for classified operations." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like papers being shuffled. "Colonel Thompson, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. That F-16 is operating under the highest possible classification level. Your F-22 pilots are to disengage immediately and return to base. No questions, no reports, no documentation of this incident." Thompson felt his stomach drop. In 25 years of military service, He'd never received such explicit orders to ignore a potential breach of protocol. "Sir, with respect, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson is already committed to the intercept. He's threatened to treat the F-16 as hostile if it doesn't comply." "Then you need to get him on the radio right now and tell him to back off." Morrison's voice carried a weight that suggested this was far more serious than a simple training exercise. "That pilot has authorization that goes beyond anything Peterson has ever seen. If he forces a confrontation, it won't be the F-16 pilot who faces consequences." The radio crackled again with Peterson's voice, now carrying an unmistakable tone of authority mixed with growing irritation. "Falcon 77, this is your final warning. Alter course immediately, or I will be forced to take aggressive action." Rebecca's response came back calm and measured, but with an undertone that made Thompson's blood run cold. "Lightning 11, I strongly advise you to contact your base command before proceeding. You are about to make a career-ending mistake." Peterson's laugh came through the radio speakers with sharp edges. "Falcon 77, I don't know who you think you are, but flying an old F-16 doesn't give you the authority to threaten an F-22 squadron commander. You have 10 seconds to alter course." Rebecca checked her instruments one final time, confirming her position and mission parameters. Everything was exactly as it should be, which meant the F-22 pilots were operating without proper briefings, a dangerous situation that could escalate rapidly if not handled correctly. She'd hoped to avoid revealing her true authorization level, but Peterson's aggressive posture left her no choice. "Lightning 11, this is Falcon 77. My call sign is Phantom 01, operating under Ghost Unit authorization. I suggest you verify my credentials before proceeding." The radio silence that followed was deafening. Lieutenant Colonel James Peterson felt his confidence waver for the first time since the intercept began. He'd never heard of Ghost Unit authorization, but the way the F-16 pilot had delivered the information suggested it carried significant weight. His wingman, Major Robert Hayes, had moved into closer formation, awaiting orders that Peterson suddenly wasn't sure he should give. "Lightning 12, did you copy that transmission?" Peterson asked his wingman over their private channel. "Affirmative, Lightning 11. Never heard of Ghost Unit authorization. Could be a bluff." Peterson's training told him to treat unknown authorization codes as potential security threats, but something about the F-16 pilot's calm demeanor suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. He'd risen to his current rank by making decisive choices under pressure, but he'd also learned to recognize when a situation might be more complex than it initially appeared. His radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Nellie's base. "Lightning 11, this is Control. You are ordered to disengage immediately and return to base. Repeat, disengage immediately. Peterson's jaw tightened beneath his oxygen mask. Being ordered to disengage during an active intercept was highly unusual, especially when he'd been operating under standard protocols for unauthorized aircraft in restricted airspace. Control, Lightning 1-1. Request clarification on disengage order. We have an unknown aircraft refusing to comply with lawful instructions. Lightning 1-1, this is Colonel Thompson. You will disengage immediately. That is a direct order. The aircraft you are intercepting has proper authorization for its current mission. The pieces began clicking together in Peterson's mind. The unusual call sign, the confident demeanor, the immediate intervention from base command. He'd been in the Air Force long enough to recognize the signs of a classified operation, but his pride had been stung by the F-16 pilot's earlier comments about career-ending mistakes. Control, Lightning 1-1. Requesting confirmation of Ghost Unit authorization protocols. The pause that followed lasted nearly a full minute, long enough for Peterson to wonder if he'd asked a question he shouldn't have. When Colonel Thompson's voice returned, it carried a tone of carefully controlled urgency. Lightning 1-1. Ghost Unit authorization is classified above your current clearance level. You are ordered to return to base immediately for debriefing. No further communication with the F-16 is authorized. Peterson exchanged glances with his wingman, though their helmet visors made meaningful eye contact impossible. In all his years of flying, he'd never encountered a situation where his security clearance was deemed insufficient for operational details. The implications were beginning to sink in, and none of them were favorable to his current career trajectory. Lightning 1-2, form up for return to base, he ordered, his voice lacking the confidence it had carried earlier. As the two F-22s began their banking turn away from the F-16, Peterson couldn't resist one final transmission. Falcon 7-7, this is Lightning 1-1. We are disengaging as ordered. Safe flight. Rebecca's response came back with what sounded almost like sympathy. Lightning 1-1, no hard feelings. You were doing your job. Just remember that sometimes the most dangerous missions are the ones nobody talks about. Rebecca Martinez watched the F-22s disappear into the distance, their contrails gradually fading against the clear desert sky. She'd hoped the entire encounter could have been avoided with proper communication between command levels, but she'd learned long ago that bureaucratic failures were an inevitable part of military operations. What mattered now was completing her mission without further interference. She adjusted her heading slightly, following the waypoints that would take her to coordinates that didn't officially exist on any map. The landscape below shifted from the familiar desert terrain of Nevada to mountain ranges that few people ever saw from ground level. Her destination was a facility so classified that even its existence was compartmentalized among different intelligence agencies. The radio crackled with a new voice, this one carrying the authority of someone accustomed to handling sensitive operations. Phantom Zero One, this is Deep Six Control. We monitored your intercept situation. Are you clear to proceed? Deep Six Control, Phantom Zero One. I'm clear and on approach to designated coordinates. ETA in 15 minutes. Copy, Phantom Zero One. Be advised, weather conditions at your destination are optimal and ground personnel are standing by. Your cargo is prepared for immediate transfer upon arrival. Rebecca's eyes flicked to the sealed compartment behind her seat, where a titanium briefcase containing materials that could reshape global power balances sat secured with locks that required biometric identification to open. She'd been transporting similar items for 3 years, ever since her selection for the Ghost Unit program that officially didn't exist within any branch of the military. The Ghost Unit had been created in response to intelligence operations that were too sensitive for traditional military channels. Its pilots were selected from the most skilled and psychologically stable officers across all branches of the armed forces. They flew missions that required absolute secrecy, often operating aircraft that had been modified with technology years ahead of what the public knew existed. Rebecca's F-16 looked standard from the outside, but its electronics suite included quantum encryption systems and sensor packages that could detect threats from distances that would have been impossible with conventional equipment. More importantly, its pilot had been trained to operate in situations where normal chains of command and protocol didn't apply. As she approached the coordinates, a runway appeared in the landscape that had seemed empty just moments before. The camouflage technology was so sophisticated that even trained pilots had difficulty spotting the facility until they were directly overhead. Rebecca lined up for her approach, nodding the ground crews that emerged from concealed positions to guide her landing. The touchdown was smooth, and she taxied to a designated parking area where technicians were already preparing to service her aircraft. As she shut down the engines, Rebecca reflected on the morning's events. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson had been doing his job according to standard procedures, but his aggressive approach had nearly created an incident that could have compromised national security. She climbed out of the cockpit and was immediately approached by a man in civilian clothes who looked like he'd stepped out of a government recruiting poster. "Captain Martinez, I'm Agent David Richards from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to discuss the intercept situation." Rebecca removed her helmet, shaking out her dark hair as she studied the agent's face. She'd worked with DIA personnel before, and they typically didn't involve themselves in routine mission debriefings unless something had gone significantly wrong. Agent Richards, the intercept was resolved without compromise. The F-22 pilots were operating without proper briefings, but they disengaged when ordered. Richards nodded, but his expression suggested the situation was more complex than a simple communication failure. "Captain, we've received intelligence that suggests someone may have deliberately withheld information about your mission from the F-22 squadron. We need to determine if this was an accident or something more serious." The implications of Richard's words settled over Rebecca like a cold blanket. If someone had intentionally created the intercept situation, it meant there might be individuals within the military hierarchy who were either trying to expose the Ghost Unit program or were working to undermine its operations for reasons that could threaten national security. Agent Richards led Rebecca into a debriefing room that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood the psychological impact of environment on information sharing. The walls were a calming blue-gray color, the lighting was soft but adequate, and the furniture was arranged to encourage conversation rather than interrogation. Despite the pleasant setting, Rebecca could feel the weight of the situation settling around her like a heavy coat. "Captain Martinez, I want you to understand that what we're about to discuss goes beyond your normal mission parameters," Richards began, settling into a chair across from her. "The intercept you experienced this morning may have been orchestrated by individuals who are actively working against Ghost Unit operations." Rebecca set her helmet on the table between them, her expression remaining neutral despite the gravity of the accusation. "Agent Richards, are you suggesting that someone within our own military structure deliberately compromised operational security?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." Richards opened a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be communication logs. "We've been monitoring unusual patterns in flight authorization requests and clearance communications. Someone with high-level access has been selectively withholding information about Ghost Unit missions from regional commanders." The implications were staggering. If someone within the military hierarchy was deliberately creating situations where Ghost Unit operations could be exposed or compromised, it represented a security breach that could affect national defense capabilities. More personally, it meant that Rebecca and other Ghost Unit pilots were being put at risk by people who were supposed to be protecting them. Who would have the access necessary to manipulate communications at that level? Rebecca asked, though she suspected the answer wouldn't be comforting. "Someone with Pentagon-level clearance who understands both the Ghost Unit program and regional operational protocols. We're talking about a very small group of individuals who have the knowledge and authority to create this type of situation." Richard swiped to another screen on his tablet, revealing a network diagram that looked like a spider web of connections between various military and intelligence agencies. The problem is that the Ghost Unit program was designed to be compartmentalized. Very few people know about its existence, and even fewer understand its operational scope. This limits our suspect pool, but it also means that anyone with access could cause significant damage. Rebecca studied the diagram, noting the connections between different agencies and command structures. The complexity was both impressive and terrifying. Impressive because it showed the level of coordination required to maintain such a classified program. Terrifying because it revealed how many points of failure existed within the system. "What do you need from me?" she asked, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. "We need you to continue your normal mission parameters, but with enhanced awareness of potential security compromises. If you encounter any unusual situations, unexpected intercepts, communication failures, or changes to established protocols, you're to report them immediately through Ghost Unit channels." Richards closed the tablet and leaned forward slightly. "Captain, I want you to understand that we're not just dealing with a potential security leak. We're dealing with someone who may be actively working to expose or destroy the Ghost Unit program. The missions you fly are critical to national security, and someone is trying to stop them." The weight of responsibility settled on Rebecca's shoulders like a familiar burden. She'd accepted the risks that came with Ghost Unit operations, but she'd assumed those risks would come from foreign adversaries or equipment failures, not from betrayal within her own military structure. The realization that someone with trusted access was actively working against her missions changed everything about how she would approach future operations. "Agent Richards, how many other Ghost Unit pilots have been affected by these security compromises?" "You're the third pilot to experience unusual intercepts or communication failures in the past month. The pattern is becoming more pronounced, which suggests that whoever is responsible is becoming more aggressive in their efforts." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the debriefing room. If other Ghost Unit pilots were experiencing similar problems, it meant the threat was systematic rather than isolated. Someone was mounting a coordinated campaign against the program, and that someone had significant resources and access. The door to the debriefing room opened, and a woman in military uniform entered with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation style, and her uniform displayed the stars of a brigadier general. Rebecca immediately stood and saluted. "At ease, Captain Martinez. I'm General Patricia Sullivan, Director of the Ghost Unit program." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades making decisions that affected national security. Agent Richards has briefed me on your situation. We need to discuss how we're going to address this security breach." Rebecca remained standing until the general gestured for her to sit. Sullivan's presence in the debriefing room indicated that the situation had escalated beyond routine security concerns. When program directors became personally involved in individual mission debriefings, it usually meant that something significant was happening at the highest levels of command. General Sullivan, Agent Richards mentioned that other Ghost unit pilots have experienced similar security compromises. How widespread is this problem? More widespread than we initially realized, Sullivan replied, settling into a chair that seemed too small for her commanding presence. "We've identified at least 6 incidents in the past 2 months where Ghost unit operations have been compromised by what appeared to be communication failures or unauthorized intercepts. The pattern suggests deliberate action rather than coincidental mistakes." Agent Richards opened his tablet again, this time displaying a timeline that showed the progression of incidents. The timing of these compromises corresponds with several high-profile intelligence operations. Someone is either trying to expose the Ghost unit program or trying to disrupt specific missions that affect national security interests. Rebecca studied the timeline, noting that the incidents had become more frequent and more aggressive over time. The morning's intercept with the F-22s represented an escalation that could have resulted in a serious confrontation between military units. If the pattern continued, future incidents might involve more serious consequences. "General, what are the possible motivations for someone to target Ghost unit operations?" Rebecca asked, though she suspected the answer would involve international politics and intelligence operations that went far beyond her current clearance level. "There are several possibilities," Sullivan replied. "Foreign intelligence services would obviously benefit from exposing or disrupting our most sensitive operations. However, we're also considering the possibility that someone within our own government may be working to shut down the Ghost unit program for political or budgetary reasons. The implications of internal political opposition to the Ghost unit program were almost as disturbing as the possibility of foreign infiltration. Rebecca had always assumed that her missions were supported by unified government policy, but the reality of Washington politics meant that even the most critical national security programs could become targets for political maneuvering. "General Sullivan, what are my orders going forward?" Rebecca asked, though she suspected that her future missions would be significantly more complicated than her previous operations. "You'll continue your normal mission parameters, but with enhanced security protocols and direct communication channels to Ghost Unit Command. We're also implementing a new authentication system That will make it more difficult for unauthorized personnel to interfere with your operations." Sullivan stood, indicating that the briefing was concluding. "Captain Martinez, I want you to understand that the work you do is critical to national security. Someone is trying to stop you from doing that work, and we're going to find out who they are and stop them. Until then, you have our full support and authorization to complete your missions by any means necessary." Rebecca Martinez returned to her quarters that evening with her mind spinning from the implications of the day's events. The small apartment she maintained near the classified facility was spartanly furnished but comfortable, a reflection of the transient nature of her work with the Ghost Unit program. She'd learned to keep her personal possessions minimal and her emotional attachments carefully controlled. The secure phone in her kitchen rang with the distinctive tone that indicated an encrypted call from Ghost Unit Command. She answered it immediately, recognizing the voice of her direct supervisor, Colonel Michael Davidson. "Rebecca, I've been briefed on your situation today. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, sir. More concerned about the security implications than any personal risk." She settled into the single chair at her small dining table, noting that the window blinds were already closed, a habit she developed after years of handling classified materials. "Good. I want you to know that we're taking this situation very seriously. We've identified patterns that suggest someone with significant access is deliberately creating security compromises for Ghost Unit operations." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. "Sir, Agent Richards mentioned that other pilots have experienced similar problems. Is there a possibility that we're dealing with a coordinated campaign against the program?" "That's our working assumption. We've identified communication anomalies that correspond with your intercept this morning, and similar patterns associated with other recent incidents. Someone is using their access to create situations where Ghost Unit operations could be exposed or disrupted." The implications were staggering. If someone within the military or intelligence hierarchy was actively working against the Ghost Unit program, it meant that every mission carried risks that went beyond the normal operational hazards. Rebecca had accepted the dangers associated with flying classified missions, but she'd assumed those dangers would come from foreign adversaries or equipment failures, not from betrayal within her own command structure. "Colonel Davidson, what are the possible consequences if this person continues to compromise our operations?" "In the short term, mission failures and potential exposure of classified capabilities. In the long term, possible shutdown of the Ghost Unit program and loss of critical intelligence assets." Davidson's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the broader implications of the security breach. "Rebecca, the missions you fly provide intelligence that affects national security decisions at the highest levels. Someone is trying to stop those missions, and we need to find out who they are before they succeed. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Davidson providing additional details about enhanced security protocols and communication procedures. When the call ended, Rebecca sat in her darkened apartment, considering the full scope of what she'd learned. Someone with trusted access was actively working against the Ghost Unit program, and that someone had the knowledge and authority to create significant security compromises. She moved to her computer and opened the encrypted files that contained her mission history for the past year. The operations she'd flown had taken her to locations around the world, often carrying materials or intelligence that could affect international relations. Each mission had been carefully planned and executed with the understanding that failure could have consequences far beyond her personal safety. Now she realized that some of those missions might have been compromised before they even began. The thought that someone within her own government might be working to undermine operations that she'd risked her life to complete filled her with a cold anger that she'd never experienced before. The secure phone rang again, this time with a call from an unknown number. Rebecca hesitated before answering, knowing that unauthorized calls to Ghost Unit personnel were virtually impossible due to the security protocols surrounding their communication systems. Captain Martinez, this is General Morrison from the Pentagon. I believe we need to have a conversation about this morning's incident. Rebecca's training kicked in immediately. General Morrison was the same officer who had authorized the morning's mission, and his direct involvement suggested that the security breach had reached the highest levels of military command. "Yes, sir. I'm available for any debriefing you require." "Captain, I want you to know that the intercept you experienced this morning was not the result of communication failure or bureaucratic oversight. Someone deliberately withheld information about your mission from the F-22 squadron, and we believe that same person has been responsible for other security compromises affecting Ghost Unit operations." General Morrison's confirmation of deliberate sabotage sent a chill through Rebecca's apartment. The implications were even more serious than she'd initially realized. Someone with access to the highest levels of military planning was actively working to expose or destroy the Ghost Unit program. "Sir, what are the possible motivations for this type of sabotage?" "Several possibilities, none of them good for national security. We're dealing with either foreign infiltration of our command structure or internal political opposition to the Ghost Unit program. Either way, it represents a serious threat to operations that are critical to our national defense capabilities." Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with threats to national security. "Captain Martinez, I want you to understand that you have the full support of the Pentagon for your continued operations. We will not allow political or security compromises to interfere with missions that are essential to protecting our national interests. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Morrison providing additional context about the investigation into the security breaches. When the call ended, Rebecca realized that her role in the Ghost Unit program had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a pilot flying classified missions. She was a target of individuals who were actively working to undermine national security operations. 3 days later, Rebecca found herself preparing for another mission, this time with enhanced security protocols and direct communication channels to Ghost Unit Command. The briefing room at the classified facility was filled with personnel she'd never seen before, indicating that the security breach had triggered a comprehensive review of operational procedures. General Sullivan entered the room with the bearing of someone who had spent the previous 72 hours dealing with a crisis that threatened one of the military's most sensitive programs. Ladies and gentlemen, we've identified the source of the security breaches that have affected Ghost Unit operations. The room fell silent as everyone waited for information that could explain the recent compromises. Rebecca felt her heart rate increase, knowing that the identity of the saboteur would have implications that extended far beyond her personal missions. The individual responsible for deliberately compromising Ghost Unit operations is Colonel Marcus Webb, Deputy Director of Flight Operations at the Pentagon. He has been arrested and is currently being held under charges of treason and espionage. The revelation sent shockwaves through the briefing room. Colonel Webb had been a respected officer with access to the highest levels of military planning. His betrayal represented a security breach that could have affected multiple programs beyond the Ghost Unit operations. Our investigation revealed that Colonel Webb had been providing information about Ghost Unit missions to foreign intelligence services for approximately 8 months. The intercepts and communication failures you've experienced were part of a systematic campaign to expose our most sensitive operations. Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that the source of the security breaches had been identified and eliminated. Anger that someone with trusted access had been willing to betray operations that were critical to national security. The risks she'd accepted as part of Ghost Unit operations had been multiplied by the actions of someone who should have been protecting her missions. General Sullivan, what are the implications for future Ghost Unit operations? Asked another pilot whose missions had been affected by the security breaches. Enhanced security protocols, revised communication procedures, and expanded background investigations for all personnel with access to Ghost Unit information. We will not allow this type of betrayal to affect our operations again. The briefing continued for another hour, with detailed explanations of the new security measures and communication protocols. When it concluded, Rebecca realized that her work with the Ghost Unit program would continue, but with a heightened awareness of the threats that could come from within her own command structure. As she prepared for her next mission, Rebecca reflected on the events of the past week. The intercept with the F-22s had seemed like a routine communication failure, but it had actually been the result of deliberate sabotage by someone with access to the highest levels of military planning. The experience had taught her that the most dangerous threats to national security sometimes came from unexpected sources, and that vigilance was required at all levels of military operations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as Rebecca Martinez conducted her pre-flight inspection of the F-16. The aircraft looked identical to the one she'd flown during the intercept incident, but she knew that significant modifications had been made to its communication and security systems. The Ghost Unit program had responded to the security breach with comprehensive upgrades that would make future sabotage attempts much more difficult. Her mission briefing had been conducted through new encrypted channels that provided multiple layers of authentication. The materials she would be transporting were more sensitive than usual, reflecting the program's determination to demonstrate that security breaches would not interfere with critical operations. The destination was a facility in the Pacific Northwest that officially didn't exist on any government maps. As she climbed into the cockpit, Rebecca noticed that the radio frequencies had been changed and that new authentication protocols had been installed. The lessons learned from Colonel Webb's betrayal had been incorporated into every aspect of Ghost Unit operations, from mission planning to equipment modifications. The takeoff was smooth, and she climbed to cruising altitude without incident. The landscape below shifted from desert to mountains as she followed waypoints that would take her to coordinates that were known only to a handful of individuals with the highest security clearances. The morning's flight would be a test of the new security measures, and a demonstration that the Ghost Unit program would continue despite attempts to undermine its operations. Her radio crackled with the voice of Deep Six Control, using new authentication codes that had been implemented since the security breach. Phantom 01, this is Deep Six Control. Please confirm your authentication sequence. Rebecca provided the required codes, noting that the new system required multiple layers of verification before operational communications could proceed. The enhanced security was reassuring, but it also served as a constant reminder of the betrayal that had made such measures necessary. Deep Six Control, Phantom 01. Authentication confirmed. Request permission to proceed to designated coordinates. Phantom 01, you are cleared to proceed. Be advised that weather conditions are optimal and ground personnel are standing by for your arrival. The remainder of the flight passed without incident, a stark contrast to the intercept situation she'd experienced just a week earlier. The new security protocols had eliminated the communication failures that had created opportunities for sabotage, and the arrest of Colonel Webb had removed the immediate threat to Ghost unit operations. As she approached her destination, Rebecca reflected on the lessons learned from the security breach. The Ghost Unit program had been designed to operate in secrecy, but that secrecy had also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by individuals with malicious intent. The experience had demonstrated that even the most classified operations required constant vigilance and adaptive security measures. The landing was routine, and she taxied to a parking area where technicians were waiting to service her aircraft. The ground crew moved with the efficiency of people who understood the importance of their work, and Rebecca felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that the Ghost Unit program would continue to support critical national security operations. Agent Richards approached her as she climbed out of the cockpit, his expression reflecting the relief of someone who had seen a serious security crisis resolved. "Captain Martinez, how did the new communication protocols work during your flight?" "Flawlessly, Agent Richards. The enhanced authentication procedures provided confidence that our communications were secure, and the modified equipment performed exactly as specified." Richards nodded, making notes on his tablet. "The arrest of Colonel Webb has eliminated the immediate threat to Ghost Unit operations, but we're continuing to monitor for any additional security vulnerabilities. The program is too important to national security to allow future compromises." Rebecca removed her helmet and shook out her hair, feeling the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. The events of the past week had been challenging, but they had also demonstrated the resilience of the Ghost Unit program and the dedication of the people who supported its operations. "Agent Richards, what are the long-term implications of the security breach for Ghost Unit operations?" "Enhanced security measures, expanded background investigations, and revised operational procedures. We've learned valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities that can exist within classified programs, and we're implementing changes that will make future sabotage attempts much more difficult." The conversation continued as they walked toward the debriefing facility, discussing the technical aspects of the new security systems and the ongoing investigation into Colonel Webb's activities. Rebecca realized that her work with the Ghost Unit program had been permanently changed by the experience, but she also knew that the program would emerge stronger and more secure as a result of the challenges it had faced. The sun was setting over the Pacific Northwest Mountains as Rebecca completed her post-mission debriefing. The day had been successful in demonstrating that the Ghost Unit program could continue its critical operations despite attempts to undermine its security. The enhanced protocols had worked flawlessly, and the arrest of the saboteur had eliminated the immediate threat to future missions. As she prepared to return to her quarters, Rebecca reflected on the broader implications of the security breach. The Ghost Unit program represented one of the military's most sensitive capabilities, and its protection required constant vigilance from all levels of command. The experience had taught her that national security threats could come from unexpected sources, and that the price of freedom was indeed eternal vigilance. Her secure phone rang with a call from General Sullivan, who had been monitoring the day's mission from Ghost Unit headquarters. "Captain Martinez, congratulations on a successful mission. Your performance today demonstrates that the Ghost Unit program will continue to support critical national security operations despite the challenges we've faced." "Thank you, General Sullivan. The new security protocols worked exactly as designed, and I'm confident that future missions will be conducted with enhanced protection against sabotage attempts. Captain, I want you to know that your professionalism during the security crisis was exemplary. Your actions helped us identify and eliminate a serious threat to national security, and your continued service ensures that the Ghost Unit program will fulfill its mission of protecting our national interests." The conversation concluded with Sullivan providing additional details about future operations and the ongoing investigation into Colonel Webb's activities. When the call ended, Rebecca realized that her experience with the security breach had made her a more effective pilot and a more valuable asset to the Ghost Unit program.